Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union has become a state. It has the symbols of a state. It's got the flag, it's got the anthem. But it's not the only international organisation to have a flag and an anthem, so does FIFA. But more importantly, it's got the powers of a state as well. Its laws are our laws. Its laws overrule our laws. Its laws are supreme. And the laws it makes can only come from the Commission. The Commission has the exclusive right to introduce new laws or propose the repeal of old laws, and it is entirely unelected. The European Court of Justice then determines what we have agreed under the treaties, and on a couple of occasions has interpreted the treaties to mean completely different things from what we believed we had signed up to. So, for example, the Working Time Directive came in under health and safety laws even when we had an opt-out from the social chapter. But the Commission makes laws in big areas and in small areas alike. We have no control over immigration from the European Union. That is decided by the Commission. We have no control over trade agreements. Those have to be made by the Commission. We can't make a free trade agreement with China, with India, with Brazil, or with Russia. It has to be done by the Commission. We have no ability now to make our regulations for the City of London, one of the biggest earners for this country. That is now decided by the Commission. But it makes laws that affect our daily lives as well, in the minutiae of our lives. My own constituency, a rural constituency, the rollout of rural broadband has been delayed because the European Union maintains that that is illegal state aid and needs to give us permission to do it. It's perhaps fortunate they haven't taken the same approach to the country lanes, which are surely just as essential, just as important to a rural community as rural broadband now is. The Chancellor hasn't been able to extend his scheme on reducing duty on fuel in rural areas because, again, that requires the permission of the Commission. In the budget, the British Parliament, the House of Commons, unanimously agreed to abolish the VAT charge on tampons. Could it do this? No. All the Prime Minister could do was go to Brussels, and at a dinner discussing the tragedy of migration, he had to raise the question with the other heads of state and government of women's sanitary products. And when he did so, could the Council, the democratically elected heads of state and government, do anything about it? Far from it. All they could do was ask the Commission if it would bring forward proposals. And the Commission has very generously, kindly, thoughtfully, benevolently said that it may bring forward such proposals. But interestingly, it's waiting until after the 23rd of June to do so. So the EU has the symbols of the state and the powers of a state, and it makes laws in a way that is not democratically accountable. But it's worse than that, because it's a failed state. Look at what the EU has done and what it fails to do. Look at its failings and then see that it wants more powers still, where no doubt it will fail further. Look at the Common Agricultural Policy. 40% of EU spending goes on the Common Agricultural Policy, but it makes farmers less efficient, it makes consumer prices more expensive, and it hits the poorest farmers in the world by making it hard for them to export their products to us. If you take farmers in my constituency complain about the 3-crop rule and the ban on neonicotinoids and the red tape and the paperwork they have to fill out that makes them less productive farmers. But they're also hit with higher costs. There are tariffs on agricultural chemicals to protect the German chemical industry. And this feeds through to higher prices for food. So it makes the production of food less competitive, and it makes prices for consumers higher. Higher because of these additional costs imposed for no good reason, and higher because tariffs imposed on the rest of the world, sometimes the poorest in the world, who would often find agriculture is the first way of beginning to get on a path to economic growth. But they are denied that right. They are denied that ability because the EU runs a failed common agricultural policy. And it's our money too, so the money our farmers get in the UK has come from the British taxpayer. How much better and more sensible to do it for ourselves. But if the common agricultural policy is bad, the common fisheries policy is probably worse. The destruction it's wrought on fishing communities, the destruction of fishing communities by about half from where they were in 1973 is one of the great tragedies of our membership. And the fishing communities may have been small and they are now smaller, but surely we should have a fellow feeling for our fellow citizens in this country whose livelihoods have been ruined, whose communities have been damaged by a fishing policy that has made the once richest seas in the world empty. We've had trouble with cod being almost endangered, though the stocks have now begun to recover. And with sea bass, it's now illegal to catch a single one. If you go off from Weymouth and charter a boat and you catch a single sea bass, you've committed a criminal offence because of the European Union. What a tragedy the common fisheries policy has been. But then think of the things we're not involved in, but yet are essential to the European project. The euro. The euro is a catastrophe. It has crushed the economies of the southern member states, of Portugal, of Greece, of Italy, of Spain. Youth unemployment in Greece, 47.2%. Similar levels in Spain and in Portugal. Think of the hopes, the ambitions of young people in those countries crushed by an economic scheme that's really there to lead a political project. Look at Italy, 11.4% unemployment, double the rate in the United Kingdom. No economic growth since 2000, crushed by the euro. And the answer, of course, of the European Union, of the Commission, is to have more Europe. So they've done it badly, and therefore they will now do it worse by taking more powers. They will have a fiscal union to go with the monetary union, so there is more centralisation of power, more ignoring of democratic choices. So when the Greeks vote not to have austerity, their vote is ignored in a referendum. But that's par for the course. The European Union always ignores referendums. Let's hope it doesn't ignore ours, but it ignored the French one on the Constitution, the Irish one on Dublin, the Danish one on Maastricht, the Netherlands one also on the Constitution. They just got brushed aside and the project marched on because the answer is always more Europe, even when the project has ostensibly failed. But perhaps even worse than the euro is the tragedy of the migrant crisis. A migrant crisis that has led to over 1 million people coming to the European Union, for which the European Union must take its share of the blame. Mrs. Merkel, a Pied Piper of Berlin, summoning people to come to Germany who then came, taking these incredibly risky journeys where 15 out of every 1,000 who've travelled have died. This real tragedy, this blot on the conscience of Europe, for which Europe has a responsibility. Why? Partly because Schengen took away internal borders, and as the Prime Minister of Hungary said, nobody wanted to go to Hungary, so when they knew they could only get through country by country, the journey was much less attractive. Partly because of the view of human rights that meant that if you were rescued, instead of being taken back home, you had a right to come into the European Union. And therefore people took increasingly risky journeys, knowing that if they were rescued, they would get in. And so people take leaky boats and risk their lives. And this has encouraged a mass movement of people for which there was then no proper provision when they arrived, and where many people have died in the process. And once again, what is the solution? The solution is more Europe. Let's have a European border force. That'll be the right answer. Let's make sure that Europe takes charge, because having destroyed internal borders and therefore stopped any control in the continent itself, we'll be really good at doing it across the whole of the border of the European Union. The answer to failure is always the same. So you have a failed state on the agricultural policy, a failed state on the fisheries policy, a failed state on the euro, and a failed state on migration. And that is what we have tied ourselves up to. But as we tie ourselves up to it, we have lost our democratic right. Once it's a European competence, we cannot change the law. How you vote at a general election cannot change what happens. So the parties draw up manifestos, but anything they say on agriculture is irrelevant. It's all decided by the EU. Anything on trade, it's all decided by the EU. Specific promises in manifestos turn out to be undeliverable because of the EU. The Conservatives in their last manifesto said they would stop paying child benefit to people whose children didn't live in this country. Pretty modest and reasonable request. But it's not allowed under European law. The Conservatives also said they'd bring migration down to the tens of thousands from the hundreds of thousands. Not allowed under European law. So how people vote is of less importance. In 1997 and 2010, the British people had the appearance of a complete change of government. But they could only change the government in relation to things that were not decided by the European Union. Anything that is with Europe is not any longer our democratic right. And this has a number of effects. Some of our laws come in spite of the opposition of the British government. We only have, under Lisbon, 8% of the votes on the Council of Ministers, which is lower than our proportionate share. We have one MEP for every 450,000 of population, against one for 70,000 for Malta. Again, beneath our proportionate share and more like the pre-1832 Parliament than the one we've got now. So we can't stop laws coming in. And David Cameron has lost every single vote in the Council of Ministers since he's been Prime Minister, 40 of them since 2010. So we don't get our own way within the EU. But then you can't, as a constituent, as a British citizen, seek redress of grievance once it is Europe. I've had cases of this as a local MP. People come to me when they've been maltreated by the bureaucracy, whether it's the council or the government or Europe. When it's the council or the government, the response from official bodies is usually pretty good. They try and put things right, and there are means of raising them in Parliament if they don't. But with Europe, nothing can be done. When it's the European Union, the British government may be penalised if it helps a constituent. I had a case of this kind. I was representing a farmer who'd lost some of his single farm payment for a very unfair reason. And I wrote to the government to say this was unfair, and I got a hopeless letter back. So I wrote again saying, no, this really is unfair. This farmer is being badly treated. And that was when I got the truth. And the truth was that if the British government allowed this farmer not to be fined, we, the British government, the British people, would be fined by the European Union, as we have been. We've been fined £650 million in the last 10 years, but not doing what our European masters want. And this right of redress of grievance is something that has existed since Parliament first assembled in 1265. It is one of our most ancient rights. But once it's a European competence, that ancient right has gone. And this is so important. This is important for people across the country of all age groups, of all demographies, because actually it is democracy that determines all the other government's decisions, determines policies over all other areas. So if you think of the economic prospects of leaving the European Union, if we leave, it's decided by us. And this is crucial because the reason the UK is one of the richest countries in the world is not because God made it so. It's because we had the right constitutional framework. Democracy, the rule of law, rights of property and free speech have constrained corrupt government, have made people certain of their contracts, have encouraged them to invest and reap the rewards of their labour. This is protected by democracy, where if anything goes wrong, a government may be replaced by one that will behave properly. It is democracy that has created economic success, not the other way round. So the risk of remaining in a sclerotic, bureaucratic European Union where democracy is held in contempt is so much greater than leaving and determining our own future democratically. Some people will think Jeremy Corbyn has the answers to the economy, that will believe that a collectivist socialist state will make us more prosperous. Others will believe, as I do, that David Cameron has the right answers, that being open and free marketing and entrepreneurial will make us a richer and more prosperous nation. But that is a choice for the British people to make and to unmake. It is not a choice to be made by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. And that, ladies and gentlemen, leaves us with a clear choice on the 23rd of June. The choice is your country Europe, and are you European? Or is your country the United Kingdom, and are you British? If you're European, you're voting for a bureaucratic state, a state controlled by an unelected or unaccountable commission, a state where your vote does not count. If you're voting for the United Kingdom, you're voting for a democratic, free nation, a nation with a long history of liberty, a nation where your vote counts and you get the government that you want. It is a clear choice, a choice of vision, a choice of opportunity, a choice of freedom. And is that choice a European superstate or a free, democratic United Kingdom?